So here I am at the Royal College of Music in South Kensington. Malcolm actually won a scholarship to the RCM in 1938. He was only 16, and still 16 when he entered the great RCM, virtually at the same time that the British Prime Minister at the time, Neville Chamberlain, was making his Peace for Our Time declaration. The war was soon to begin. But I don't think Malcolm really much knew about all that. His great friend Richard Adeney, the flute player, said of him, "He was full of jokes and jollity and the most daring and extrovert person I'd ever met. We were always laughing, arguing hotly, gossiping, and wandering around London looking at the sights and talking with strangers." And two other famous little tales of Malcolm at the time. Evidently, it was only Malcolm who had the audacity to play some jazz on Vaughan Williams's piano, and evidently, at one point, he dropped a fish down the pipes of the college's great hall organ.
So here I am in Ernest Hall's actual teaching room. There are photos of Ernest around the walls, and this is the room where Malcolm had his trumpet lessons. He got on very well to begin with, and in fact, almost immediately he was here, he was getting paid concerts. Here's a lovely letter he writes to the folks at home. "Dear Mother and Dad, sorry I haven't written, but I'm playing in this instead of Woodage." Woodage, by the way, was Wesley Woodage, who was another pupil of Ernest Hall, studying here at the same time. Instead of Woodage, who was playing in the London Philharmonic. "I'm writing this in the middle of the Mendelssohn Violin Concerto. With love from Malcolm. P.S. I'm getting paid 25 shillings for it." I think that probably was quite a lot of money actually then. This would have been about 1938. He did well. Here's Ernest writing about him at the end of his first term, his first report. "Trumpet, very good work," writes Ernest, "a very keen and promising pupil." He was also having piano lessons with a teacher called J. Hurst Bannister, who also writes encouragingly, "He works excellently, but needs much more self-confidence." I must admit, I find that very odd. Malcolm at that time, I can't imagine needing more self-confidence. But anyway, he goes on, "He always prepares a lot and does it well." He was also having conducting classes with Constant Lambert, and indeed played in lots of RCM concerts around that time with Lambert, also with Malcolm Sargent and other senior conductors here. Norman Del Mar, who went on to become a Warner conductor, was a fellow student at the time. Evidently, he used to play some percussion as well. He played in Vaughan Williams' Sir John in Love in the percussion section. Of course, Malcolm was also composing. There were quite a few works that he brought with him that he'd already composed before becoming a student here. His first composition teacher was Patrick Hadley, who was quite a well-known composer, someone who wrote very much in the style of Vaughan Williams, really. But he and Malcolm didn't get on that well. Malcolm used to have quite an early morning lesson, 10:25, his composition lessons were. And Patrick Hadley had a First World War wound and had a leg that needed to be screwed in. And sometimes he would ask his pupils to help him screw the leg in, which Malcolm didn't much care for, it turns out. At the end of the first term, Hadley wrote, maybe slightly surprisingly, that Malcolm was a little diffident, but suggested that when the diffidence was overcome, he should go right ahead. But he was decidedly musical. And at the second term, he called him a good musician and a steady worker. But ultimately they didn't get on that well, and Malcolm showed him various songs that he'd written, Kensington Gardens, for example, Beauty Haunts the Woods, and Patrick didn't seem to like those very much, and they fell out. And Malcolm went to the principal, George Dyson, and said, "I want a new composition teacher." And in fact, this is the time when Malcolm actually disappeared for a little bit. He didn't actually disappear, he just ran off down to the south and took some months away. But he came back, and Dyson was very sympathetic to Malcolm, and in fact got him into Gordon Jacob's books. And Gordon Jacob and Malcolm got on absolutely excellently. So here's a very nice pencil drawing of Ernest Hall. 1944, so this was taken a little bit later, in fact. We're still talking about 1939 here, really. And after Malcolm got back after this little short time away, everyone was pleased with him. Everything okay, reported Ernest Hall. Excellent work in progress, wrote Hurst Bannister. He has ideas, wrote Gordon Jacob. His work shows considerable imagination. And one interesting piece that came around about this time was his wind octet, which he never finished, actually. He was playing in a performance of the Stravinsky wind octet under the conductorship of Gordon Jacob, which he obviously enjoyed hugely because he then started writing an octet for the same slightly unusual forces. He did actually complete the work in piano duet form, which indeed is published. So by about the end of the 1940s, he had in fact changed trumpet teachers, not quite sure why, to a trumpeter called John Cousins, who played with the LPO and was also impressed by Malcolm. Technically an excellent student, he writes, at the end of the 1940 academic year. Malcolm was coming to college less and less in those days. He was getting quite a lot of outside work. He was up at Capel Garman. He spent quite a lot of time with the family. But he did pop in, obviously, appropriately. And he entered the Cobbett Prize in 1941, where, interestingly, he came second. And the winner was, in fact, Ruth Gibbs, who was a great friend of his and is well known today as a composer. He writes this lovely letter. Dear Mother and Dad, thanks for your letter and money. My string quartet has won the Cobbett Prize. There are 2 offered every year for the best chamber music by young composers. I have won the second prize, which is £5. I'm also given a copy of the score and parts done by an exceptional copyist. Much love, Malcolm. I shall not enter for the LRAM, he goes. If I'm still about then, I shall do that in September. He wasn't about, in fact, because in July that year, he was offered a job in the LPO, third trumpet, and just a little time after that, he wrote Beckus the Dandy Prat, and the rest, as they say, is history.